Hi guys, and welcome back to episode 4. I know it's been a while, and if you recall from the previous episode, I said we were going to deviate away from the manual a little bit. And in this episode, we're going to talk about paint protection film. Now, I just wanted to be clear that this isn't a comparison video comparing the various products out there. If you're looking for one of those, there's plenty of them out there already. This video is more about the product I chose and the route I went down. Now, I know what you're most probably thinking. It's very early in my build to be thinking about paint protection, where most people only think about this after their car is finished and on the road. But when viewing the products out there, I do notice they had a few design flaws, which I wasn't very happy with. So for those of you that are new to paint protection film, I just wanted to point out that if you are thinking about doing this for yourself, ensure that if you take your car to someone to install this, or if you're going to do this yourself, make sure that you use an installer or a supplier who provides CAD cut film. And the reason why I say this, when I was looking into this, I came across quite a few horror stories where people had taken their vehicles to an installer and they hadn't used CAD cut film. They actually had stuck a sheet of film to the side of the vehicle and they used a scalpel to cut out the various cut lines for whatever vehicle they're applying it to. And there's been quite a lot of reports, depending on how good the installer is with a scalpel, where the installers actually cut through the film and actually into the paint underneath. Although this might not be visible immediately, it could lead to rust later on, depending on what type of vehicle it is. It's not too critical on a Caterham, but should you decide to remove the film at a later date, those cut marks are quite evident. That wasn't the reason why I went down a different route. When I was viewing the products off the shelf, even the CAD cut ones, I noticed they had one major design flaw, is that on the bottom edge, along the square section here, that the film didn't wrap around underneath the car. It actually stopped just shy of the edge. And I thought this was quite a critical area, being so close to the front wheels and the likelihood of the wheels kicking up stones and chipping paint directly on the edge. And even though if you've had film over the paint and the paint just underneath had been chipped away, there's a good possibility that the aluminium could start corroding underneath, and that could spread further up into the paint underneath the film. And I wanted to avoid that. The other reason why I decided not to use off-the-shelf products was that the film ends just short of the front suspension. And although technically it's not a problem, it's just that film tends to change color slightly and not fade a little bit, dullens a little bit over time. And effectively it causes a two-tone effect, which I wanted to avoid. So in order to get around these two problems, I had to do a custom install. And when I was looking at installers local to me who actually install the film that I chose, which was Xpel, I was quite shocked by the prices that they were quoting. There was one well-known installer. Their prices start at £2,200 plus VAT for a Caterham. And I did think that was a bit excessive, and that wasn't even a custom install. So I contacted Xpel in America, because in America you can buy Xpel directly from them, or you can buy film directly from them. You just state what width of film do you want and how many feet. They sell it by the foot, or they sell it by the rolls, and they will just ship you whatever you purchase from them. So I placed my order with Xpel in America. The order went through. I got my email confirmation saying it was being processed. About a week later, I got a call from Xpel in the UK, and they informed me that being a UK resident, that my order had been transferred to them, and they've got a bit odd rules here in the UK in that they won't sell to the end customer. They'll only sell to distributors or installers, which I did find a bit odd. So after a couple of emails backwards and forths, speaking to the guys in America, they couldn't understand why the UK were like this. This went on for a couple of weeks. I then found a body wrap shop in America who had bought a 100-foot roll, and they were selling the rest of it off on eBay. So I bought 15-foot from them. While that was in the post on the way over here, Xpel UK eventually got back to me, and they had changed their mind and decided that I actually could buy directly from them, but it was too late already. However, I did end up buying some installation gel from them. So that took a few weeks to arrive. So my next task was that I had to create a template so I could get this CAD cut. And in order to do so, I did that using paper. And this is how I did it. So I started out by attaching a piece of plotting paper to the side of the car. And I soon realized that these side panels are anything but flat, as they twist and turn in every direction, resulting in my biggest dilemma. Paper doesn't stretch. The only solution I could come up with was to cut the paper around the front suspension mounts. This would allow me to trace around the apertures, and I could thereafter tape the paper back together when it was time to scan it. The next challenge was to decide where I wanted the film to end. For the top, I had two choices. I could stop where the bonnet meets the side panel, or overlap the film underneath the bonnet, which seemed like the more sensible option. The underside wasn't as easy. Initially, I was thinking of cutting out individual holes for each of the rivets and then running the film to the edge of the panel where I could manually trim it. But once I'd marked them all out, I soon realized that this wasn't going to work, and I decided it would be best to end the film just shy of the rivets. After marking out all the edges and holes, I sent the template off to a local architectural firm, who scanned them and emailed them back. And this was the end result. Now, if any of you have ever worked with a vectoring application, you'll know that you'll want all your lines to be as smooth as possible, as the plotter's knife doesn't actually move when cutting. It's actually the paper that moves, so you want to minimize as many moves as possible. As you can see when zooming in on this section, which is the lip which folds over onto the top rail in front of the scuttle where the bonnet rests, is anything but smooth. So I spent about a weekend or so working my way around both sides, cleaning up the lines and the radiuses. A task I do not wish to repeat, but in the end the result was quite satisfying. As I decided not to run the film all the way to the edge of the underside and stop just shy of the rivets, this should still give me enough protection along the bottom edge. Of the kits I'd seen available, none of them actually wrapped around the bottom edge of the side skin, which I think is crucial. Now, before I jumped into cutting the film, I purchased some low-tack vinyl, which is used for sandblasting stenciling, and used this as a practice run. During this install, I used sunlight soap and water, which I did find dries out too quickly. The only thing I regret not doing was not removing the bonnet catches, as I didn't want to drill through the powder coating when drilling out the rivets. Only later on, when watching another YouTube video, did I find out that the factory only drills these holes after the chassis has been powder coated. But on a positive note, they did help as a reference point during the installation. Another good point I learned during the installation task was where the alignment points were on the vinyl in relation to the side panel. Once I had the vinyl aligned up horizontally, it was actually quite quick to apply. and I thankfully learned that the front was going to be a little bit tricky. So I decided to sacrifice a piece of Xpel film to test this. This time I used the Xpel installation gel, which doesn't dry out as quickly. I soon realized that the film needed to be stretched to prevent a crease forming in the top corner. And I also had to trim off the excess around the suspension apertures, as this caused the film to lift in these areas. My biggest problem was trying to get the film to lay flat between the top suspension mounts, which kept forming a bubble. I tried heating the film, but the bubble kept reappearing, and I wasn't too keen on this idea. For some unknown reason, I decided to stretch the film a bit more, and this resolved the problem. Weird, I know. You'd think a panel with a dent in has a longer surface than a flat panel. But as you can see, stretching the film resolved my problem. So this was the big moment when it was time to cut the film, and immediately alarm bells went off when I noticed that the pinch rollers which hold the film and move it in and out of the plotter were leaving indentations on the film. Knowing that I had tested this with the stencil vinyl, I knew if I reduced the pressure of the rollers anymore that there was a good chance the film would walk. Walking is a term used when the vinyl starts to move on the horizontal plane. You could possibly get away with this on smaller jobs, but when working with something that's almost 2 meters long, this would be disastrous. So I had learned this when printing the template out on a piece of paper, and that's why you see the plotter cutting in 150mm bands from left to right. Now I don't remember if it was all the excitement or just nerves, or if I just deleted the footage, but I followed the same process as I did when applying the stencil vinyl. I used the bonnet catch as my point of reference and worked my way outwards to line it up horizontally. You may not have noticed, but I had a minor oh shit moment when I first placed the film on the car and it came up too short. It was about 1 inch too short at each end, and relief only came when I remembered about a video where one of the Xpel installers said you could stretch the film up to 6 inches longer. And I assumed that the only reason why I had shrunk was because it had been removed from the backing paper. So with it all lined up, I worked my way outwards from the center. Now if you're going to apply this yourself, I would recommend using a bright light to inspect your work. You'll be amazed how many more bubbles show up underneath a bright light. Now I did get 2 small pieces of dirt underneath the film during the installation. The first was quite easy to remove, but the second I had to pull the film back, and you'll notice that I sprayed the film and not the panel. The reason I did this is so if the 2 sticky sides touch each other, they don't stick together, as this will damage the film when trying to pull them apart. Now bearing in mind, I've never worked with PPF or even wrapped a vehicle before, so I took my time making sure when I squeezed the film I wasn't going to need to pull it back up again. You'll notice I cut the suspension holes with an overlap, as I thought it would be too risky to cut the holes the exact size and trying to get them to line up correctly. So here's the view once I had finished. I was actually quite surprised how shiny it was, and overall I was quite pleased. After leaving the film to dry for a day, I started to trim the apertures for the suspension mounts. This was a tedious job, trying not to nick the paint while doing it so. I must admit I did nick the paint in 1 or 2 places, but I wasn't too concerned as I was going to apply the IVA trim all around them. So guys, that's all for this episode. If you enjoyed watching it, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.